The woman you are seeing right now is Dina Watson. She was born on February 13th, 1977 in Germany before moving to the United States when she was just a baby. She was legally adopted by Tony and Cindy on January 24th, 1980. Thomas grew up in Walker, Alabama with her parents and younger sister, Alonda. They moved to Louisiana for a while, only to later settle in Birmingham, also in Alabama, during the 90s. Tina was cheerful, had a beautiful smile, and was very close with her family, but her life was not perfect. From a very young age, she suffered from a heart condition called PSBT. In general terms, it would cause fainting, seizures, and could even cause death. For a while, she decided to treat this condition with medication, but to Gabe Watson in 2001, the man you're seeing right now is Gabe Watson, or David Gabriel Watson. He went through high school at Hoover High. Most of his journey in this place was common. He played sports, but it wasn't until his final year that he decided to dedicate himself more fully to basketball. He committed. However, this commitment didn't last too long, and it ended when he turned 23 years old. After ending his commitment, he chose to start another relationship, which lasted 3 years, but they eventually broke up again. Then, soon after his last relationship, he met Gabe Watson around the year 2001. The man you are seeing right now is Gabe Watson, or David Gabriel Watson. He went through high school at Hoover High School. Most of his journey in this place was common. He was willing to play sports, but it was only in his last year that he decided to dedicate himself more fully to basketball. He completed his university studies after high school of Alabama in Birmingham, and was described by his family and friends as a person with few problems, good humor, a very funny guy, but calm. They both met at the university in Birmingham and officially started dating, as I said before, in 2001, sometime after Tina became single again. It was later, after a year-end party, when Tina decided to give him a chance and start dating him. A very important detail for this story is to tell you that Gabe loved diving, was his favorite hobby. And he decided to show it to Tina, and Tina seemed somewhat happy with this hobby. Although his friends said that she really didn't like these kinds of things, she didn't like diving or these kinds of sports, but well, Tina apparently liked it since Gabe liked it. So in 2003, he decided to tell his parents that he would take diving classes with Dave. She wanted to share this activity with him. She really liked that they shared something together, and she communicated it to them. So the parents told her they were worried, but she very convincingly told them everything would be okay. They really didn't want Tina to end up in the hospital or with something much worse, but they had to let her go since it was something that made her happy, apparently. And one of the most important details to highlight at this moment is that the parents also didn't like Gabe's attitude. They really didn't have many good things to say about him. She knew it perfectly well, but still decided to accept Gabe's proposal and get engaged to him. So the wedding date would be in 2003 in October. Shortly before the wedding, Tina went to visit her father, Tommy, and just kept going with other things. Gabe proposed to Tina in 2001. While her family was very happy with the engagement, as they had adopted Tina as their own daughter, Tina's family was unhappy due to Gabe's attitude. They really didn't have many good things to say about him. She knew it perfectly well, but still decided to accept Gabe's proposal and get engaged to him. So the wedding date would be in October 2003. Shortly before the wedding, Tina went to visit her father, Tommy, to tell him that she wanted to increase her life insurance. She went with her father because he had been working on this life insurance business for several years of his life. He was still in that business. He knew a lot about it, and therefore it would be easy for him to change his life insurance and make it higher. This did not please her at all. She suspected something about the whole matter. It did not seem to her to be something normal, to a higher one. She really wondered what had made her still needed to be updated in a few months when her condition worried her, as she really thought the surgery had helped her a lot. Then she asked him what was happening to him and why he wanted to change it. She stated that all issues were resolved, she had upped the life insurance, and he should disregard it. As the only beneficiary, now that they were going to get married, that's how things should be. Obviously, Tommy didn't like this at all. He suspected something about the whole matter. It didn't seem normal to him. So he told Tina that since the insurance still needed to be updated in a few months, when those months were up, only then would they make the whole change. Tina was still worried about what she would tell Gabe about it, so her father told her to just tell him that everything was resolved and that she already had the life insurance as he wanted. The matter ended there. However, the families, and more than anything Tommy, now that he saw this side of Gabe, were at odds. Let's say they didn't get along at all, and in fact there were a few disagreements during the wedding. Beyond the feuds, however, these two people got married on... She simply told him that she wanted to do that and nothing more. Most things turned out well. The last time Tommy, Tina's father, saw his daughter was during the wedding reception. He was lucky enough to drive her to the wedding and therefore had all that way to tell her how much he loved her and how much he really wanted her to know that he supported her in everything she chose. Also, along the way, he told her that if she was not convinced of getting married, she could stop it right at that moment. Tina was sure she wanted to marry Gabe, so she simply expressed her desire to do that alone. Her father chose to accompany her to the wedding. He reached her at the reception while she was in the elevator. As he was leaving, he told her he loved her and also managed to tell Gabe to take good care of her. This was, after all, the last moment Tommy had to appreciate with his daughter. It was the last moment in which he could tell her that he loved her very much and that he really hoped she would have a honeymoon in Australia. For the trip, a 7-day diving package with the Mike Ball Dive Expeditions offered a cruise package. In itself, for the honeymoon was to visit the Great Barrier Reef, a perfect reef for diving, and days before the trip, the diving computer that of his life. Tina suggested it as their honeymoon trip because she wanted to share the experience with him. And Gabe, as he had been waiting his whole life to make this trip, told her it was a great idea. So they bought tickets for a honeymoon in Australia. For the trip, Gabe bought a 7-day diving package with the company Mike Ball Dive Expeditions. This package was a cruise with 25 dives in very touristy places and places well known by divers of all kinds. A few days before the trip, the diving computer that had to make a clarification here, and that is that this wristband worked anyway if the battery was upside down. The very important object when diving, as it has all possible information. Let's say that without this little computer going down when they are diving is quite dangerous since it would take out the battery and put it back in, which had to be repaired before the trip. Gabe then decided to send the device to a technical service he had known for years. They told him at this place that the batteries were in backwards and therefore the device was not working properly. Now I want to make a clarification here, and that is that this wristband worked anyway if the battery was backwards. The issue is that it was not working well. The alarms were not sent, they did not sound a strange thing like that, but well, let's say that an average person would notice unless they took out the battery and put it back in. Supposedly then the problem was completely fixed, so go on a trip. 2 days passed and they began the long journey to Sydney. For this, they had to make some stops to fly to Australia. Once there, they decided to see all the possible tourist spots. They went back and forth unpacking a few things, especially the diving equipment. It seemed, according to the photos they had taken and what they were telling friends over the phone, everything was fine, they seemed happy. That's when I should start the day of the events finally, where they board the cruise. It was October 21st and the couple was in Townsville. It was in that place where they would board the catamaran that would take them diving for 7 days. The cruise leaves at 10 p.m. from Townsville and begins to head towards its first stop, the sinking of the SS John Gala. As the cruise set sail, the newlyweds headed to their cabin to unpack a few things, especially the diving gear that would be so important during this trip. Once this was done, they would go to the welcome and later give a small interview with the trip director, necessary for both the company and travelers to ensure that the entire trip was pleasant and safe. Normally, this interview during the interview managed to determine that Gabe was an experienced diver and therefore did not need any kind of help to go down. Gabe had dived more than 50 times in different ways, while Tina was not experienced in the slightest. She was just starting, had had a few classes, some had even ended abruptly, so clearly she was going to need help. So this travel director, to be able to do it together, and they succeeded. The reality was she needed at least one orientation class to be able to go down to the Yungala, so he recommended that they do it. However, the couple said they wanted to go down together and that during the interview he was able to determine that Gabe was an experienced diver and therefore did not need any to rescue people. He was certified to go down to such depths as the Yungala, but he was not certified to be experienced in the slightest. She was just starting, she had had a few classes, some had even ended abruptly, so clearly she was going to need help. So this travel director, Wade, decided to tell them that she needed to have some more classes. She needed at least one orientation class to be able to in this orientation, but they decided not to take it. And however, the couple said they wanted to go down together and they planned to do and release them without more warnings was necessary. To be clear, Gabe was certified all along. Rescue people, he was certified to go down to depths like that of the Yungala, but he was not certified to be anyone's guide. He was not a professor, not a teacher, none of that. I should clarify that a master is a kind of diver, let's say, one who has more experience than Gabe, who clearly didn't have it, and another type of certification as far as I understand. The director emphasized the orientation, but instead of a group session, they gathered, conversed, and exchanged diving experiences. The boat then only arrives at the area the next day. During the course of the hours they were there, they met two couples, more experienced than them and with many more years. They were Paula and Ken Snyder and Doug. And Ginger Milson. Both couples described Tina as a kind and happy girl, very affectionate. However, on Gabe's side, while he seemed friendly and in a good mood, he was still a bit distant. They really didn't have a bad impression of him. He was just quiet and distant from all of them. Even so, they made them part of the group. They got together, chatted, and shared diving experiences. The boat arrives in the area the next day, where they had to dive around 6:30 and an hour later the passengers started to have breakfast. The idea itself was quite simple. The divers would go down through a line, a small rope, towards the wreckage. There they would look around a bit, see exactly what the instructors pointed out to them, and then they would go back up to the surface. Nothing extremely difficult or very complicated. In fact, they had instructions on where to stop, specifically to be able to could be controlled underwater. Let's remember that it's not the person who was the least bit experienced could do it if they were calm and respecting all the instructions. As I said before, the trip was perfectly instructed. However, we will later find out that there were quite a few things in safety terms not fully adhered to. Before departing, the trip director advised the boys to undertake the orientation. Tina would show up so that she at least knew where she had to stop, where the stops were. Emergency, where she had to rest and be able to see if she could really control herself underwater. Remember, it's not the same to go to Alabama to take diving classes in a pool as it is to be in the ocean. Therefore, an orientation class would have been the right thing. Yet Gabe and Tina again refused the invitation, and they were even already in the water, when suddenly Gabe noticed that his wrist device was malfunctioning. So he got out of the water, told Tina to do the same, and went to a person to see if they could help him and what was happening to the machine. The person with that could act in case of emergency if something happened to Tina. Most importantly, they were always together, never leaving each other. Nobody behind. The couple prepared from head to toe with the diving suit. They had everything ready to go out and they were even already in the water. When suddenly Gabe noticed that in return his device on his wrist was failing. So he got out of the water, told Tina to do the same, and went with a team member to see if they could help him and what was happening to the machine. The person with whom Gabe went to check the problem thought that he was referring to the device not recording the pressure of the tanks. So he relaxed a bit and told Gabe that it was simply a problem that was not very important. They took out the battery, put it on the right side, and it seemed like the problem was finally solved once again. Tina, on her part, seemed to have trouble going down, so she needed more weight, and that's what she did. She got a vest with more integrated weight, which ended up being she had to use it because it weighed too much. Upon their return, she knows whose idea it was. Let's say when Gabe came back and she told him she was having trouble going down, they started arguing about whether or not to add weight. The thing is, there's no panic on Tina's face, something that with more weight. It's not known if Gabe took it or maybe Tina did it without consulting anyone. Or if another person gave it to them. What needs to be mentioned now is that, anyway, Tina was wearing a vest that she shouldn't have been wearing because it was too heavy. When they get back on the ship before fixing the navigation computer, an assistant who was upstairs says that Gabe and Tina came out of the water a bit red and with slightly teary eyes. There might even be a bit of panic on Tina's face. Something certainly grabbed her attention, but instead of descending 10 meters to the wreck, they only approached an additional 4 meters, taking them about 3. I probably shouldn't have let her go if I saw a look of panic on her face. 15 minutes post-event, she starts declining. According to Gabe, the current that day was from this point on we only had Gabe's gaze of what happened since there was no one else around. Down there, in fact, they were alone, same group, and near them they were starting to lower some others from another boat called Jazz 2. But they were still far away, so they couldn't see anything. Gabe and they descend about 10 meters to see the wreck. They approach about 4 meters more, which takes them about 3 minutes in total. And for a minute, they head towards she couldn't hold on, that she couldn't go up. It was like she starts to go down. According to Gabe, the current that day was quite strong, in fact stronger than he expected and stronger than he could handle, normally controlled. He knew from that moment when he went down that the situation was not good at all. Once they are near the wreck, Tina moves away a bit, and when she comes back, she indicates to Gabe that she wanted to go up again. Here's where the issue starts. Gabe tries to go up with Tina by this rope that was telling them, and when he looks down, he sees that Tina... However, upon another look at her, he noticed she was increasingly sinking instead of actually being able to float. So he decided to let her go for a second to be able to use his vest to inflate it and thus help her. This vest, by the way, is quite useful when diving, as when inflated, it also supports a bit directly. Would have inflated Tina's vest first, but no, he didn't. What we can say about this inflated could hold her weight better and help her get up too. When he lets go of Tina, he thinks that she would just inflate the vest the same way. However, when he looked at her again, he saw that, and she should act calmly, but she didn't, that she really couldn't inflate it. He then tries to get down to where Tina was, but he couldn't do it because he was going too fast, faster than he was capable of. What clearly would have worked is if he had directly inflated Tina's vest first, but he didn't. What we can say about this mask before it gets too much water in it? In situations like this, we don't know how a panicked person. He leans back to grab her after her screams behind the mask. As previously mentioned, he is certified to do so. Unable to reach her, he watched Tina continue with the arms outstretched for his help. She weighed, with her arms extended towards him going down. At one point, he manages to get closer, but Tina starts to flail her arms frantically and ends up pulling off his mask. So he has to let her go again and try to put on his mask before too much water gets in. Simultaneously, he grabs his extra respirator and inhales deeply. When he leans back in to try to grab her, he moves so quickly that he even comments that he hurt his ear going back through the water, according to him, and he couldn't reach her. He could only see Tina still with her arms extended, waiting for him to help her. She weighed his wife so they would go help her. She tried to tell him that she was in danger. However, they didn't understand anything and didn't go to help her, so she decided to follow her own path. She shouldn't have done what she did, but, well, according to him, he panicked at that moment and simply decided to go look for help. So he decided to ascend to the surface as fast as he could. He ascended, But it's worth noting the following. This case was analyzed by diving experts, people who have been describing these moments. He sees 2 divers in the water and tries to wave them down and point to where his wife was so they could go help her. He tried to tell them he was in danger, however they didn't understand anything and they didn't go to help her, so he decided to continue his way to the surface and ask for help on the boat. When he reached the surface, a total of 7 minutes had passed for saving, so he needed this knowledge. He had made over 50 trips of this kind and he'd received the instructions repeatedly. It would be impossible for him. Was analyzed by diving experts. People who have been, which, well, we're going to discuss a bit later because there are quite a few contradictions in all of this. One way to handle such cases is to descend with a few kicks, not even many, to reach the person, inflate their vest, release their weight, and bring them to the surface. That's the standard process which Gabe purportedly adhered to. Trained to do... I say it again, he was certified for rescue, so he should have known all this. He had done More than 50 trips of this style, and he had been given the instructions many times. It would be impossible for him not to know what he had to do in that thing that, well, we're going to discuss a bit later because there are a few contradictions in all of this. Once on the surface, Gabe alerts a member who also calls emergency, contacting the other boat that was nearby, the Jazz 2. The two boats then begin the emergency maneuvers, which Gabe should have done. Tina. While all this was happening, Wade Singleton, the travel director, was downstairs with another group of people. In fact, he was with the trip's photographer who also took quite important photos of this occasion. Suddenly he looks to his side and sees a person lying at the bottom of the ocean. He then wonders what was going on and what this person was doing. He gets a little closer and sees that the woman has her eyes wide open and her body stiff. At that moment, he knew something was wrong. He approached and began to perform the emergency maneuvers, which Gabe should have done. Wade put his arm over the right arm of Tina and put his hand on the regulator to press the purge button so that air would enter her mouth. He used his left arm to hold Wade's head steady during the maneuvers. They managed to get Tina to the side, also the weight of this vest. He noticed it was far heavier than expected. It should have been, and that the weights were integrated into the vest. So he decided to take off his weight belt, and thus with everything inflated, rise to the surface. He took her in his arms, hugged her, and together they floated up, as Gabe should have done. Gabe surfaced after being underwater for 7 minutes. Tina 10. Which means that while he was surfacing, Wade was already rescuing her and was surfacing with him. Thanks to Wade's maneuvers, they managed to get Tina to the surface in a short time. She even arrives faster than we'll see later. Gabe was on the other boat and Tina was closer to Jazz 2 than the boat they had gone on. They lifted her onto the boat and tried to revive her for 40 minutes. The first thing they notice is that water doesn't seem to be coming out of her mouth, something that doesn't match with having drowned. She had a bit of vomit, very little in her mouth, and in fact there was also a bit of foam coming out, but again, very little. She also had the mask and respirator completely on. There was no problem in that sense. While she was trying to resuscitate her, Gabe was on the other boat and didn't ask at all to be taken to where his wife was. He didn't want to know anything. He was far away and he was with the friends they had met on that boat, telling them that it was a terrible situation and he felt awful. Unfortunately, 40 minutes of resuscitation maneuvers passed without Tina responding, so she was declared dead at 11:21 a.m., an hour after getting ready to dive. Gabe received the news of his wife's death, began to cry inconsolably. He then requested to be taken to the ship to see his wife. The rest of the groups that were nearby diving were not very aware of what was happening. Some simply knew that there was some problem with a person, but they didn't know that he had died, so the rest of the people continued diving as if nothing had happened. The idea was also not for everyone to panic and stop diving. Even one person went and returned Wade's weight belt that was still at the bottom of the ocean as if nothing had happened. On the way back, the passengers described Gabe as a person who didn't seem to have lost his wife or who was making somewhat out-of-place comments, like he even said this. Stinks, as if something minor had happened, right? Although it must also be said that there are those people who describe him as someone who really looked bad, like someone who was suffering, but well, it was roughly split between people who saw him one way and those who saw him differently. When retelling the events to the police, the story altered, but not too many, and not something that implied it had anything to do with the death. The weight that Tina was carrying and then her air would have been cut off, that someone had turned her knob adjusted to halt her air supply. The mask. But such a thing couldn't be proven if people hadn't been able to rescue her. Let's say that he was open when Gabe gets to the police station to give, and yet he didn't. But the big question was, how had he died? She still had the mask on, she had the respirator perfectly placed, the vomit did not indicate that she had died from vomiting, nor did the foam indicate anything that had to do with death. The only possibility that seemed was that her excess air had been cut off, that someone had turned the knob on the tank so that she could no longer get any more air to the mask. However, it couldn't be proven as the tank's knob allowing airflow. Gabe, upon arriving at the police station to testify, decides to inform his father about what he had discussed. During the call he had hurt his ears, which he actually hadn't said until that moment. Next to him was Paula, Gabe's father, who informed him of the facts. He and she heard him say this and thought about what? He had never mentioned it. The subject of hearing seemed quite strange to him from the first moment, since he had been with her all that time. She had comforted him, had been listening to everything he had to say, and he had never mentioned such a thing. That startling detail did not require clarifications of the mentioned event. During the call he had with his father, he asked him to be the one to tell Tina's father what had happened, so he did. Afterwards, Gabe's father hands the phone to Tina's father. Tommy, who was on his side at a business conference, was in another state and therefore did not expect what they were going to tell him. The moment he answers the call and is told that his daughter has died, he falls to the ground on his knees and is left speechless. Obviously, the area where they lived had already heard the news. Once the call was over, Tommy prepared to take a flight back to his home in Alabama. What had happened?
After telling them what had happened, Gabe's father handed a phone to the pastor, the same pastor who had married Tommy and Gabe. Tommy asked this man not to say anything at all, not to call the family, as he himself wanted to tell them what had happened.
The pastor assured him all was fine and he wouldn't disclose anything. However, by this time everything had happened. He, of course, knew absolutely nothing. But news. Once the call was over, Tommy set out to take a flight back to Alabama to his home. Unfortunately, while he was waiting for the flight, his other daughter called him crying, asking for explanations about what had happened. She had arrived at her job and all her colleagues knew what had happened, so somehow she discovered it before it felt too soon. Express visas exist, but that's an overstatement. When he had found out, he asked Tommy for more information about what had happened. He, of course, knew absolutely nothing. But of the current strange occurrences is that Tommy is finding out who knew about the news and who found out before him. Turns out that Gabe's mother was already at the Alabama airport waiting for a trip to Australia to see her son. She was at the airport, had a flight to Australia and a visa. It was too fast. Express visas exist, but this is overkill. When he found out about the news, Gabe's mother was already traveling to Australia. He pondered then about the duration this woman had known about it. Beyond that, Tommy takes the flight to Alabama, and when he gets home, he meets up with his family and they pick up the phone to call the Australian consulate. He needed to communicate with Gabe. Gabe wasn't answering his calls. He asked if it was his fault. He asked about all his messages and he needed answers. So after hours on the phone, the consulate finally connected him with Gabe, who answered and began to explain what had happened according to his words. At this point, they had no suspicion about how it had happened. I suppose at that moment, they must have believed that maybe in the water, looking him directly in the eyes as he died, maybe there had been some accident, but they didn't think that Gabe had anything to do with their daughter's death. Then Tina's mother answers him on the phone that it wasn't his fault. She asked him if he was okay, if he was recovering well from the incident. She really didn't think he had anything to do with it. She simply thought he was a victim. He had just lost his wife. He was with her exclaiming her name, holding her while they made him feel guilty because he explained to them that he was left in his mind with this image of his wife falling into the water, looking directly into his eyes as she died. So the mother definitely felt very guilty about it. However, Gabe lied to them. While the part where she was looking at him as she fell was probably true, the rest of the things he told them were lies. It turns out that Tina's family asked him over the phone if he had stayed with her during the time they were trying to revive her. They asked him if he was with her, shouting her name, holding her while they performed the resuscitation maneuvers, and he said yes, but without water. What remained then was to know if it was accidental or on purpose, if someone had made another boat go to see her unintentionally. Beyond all that, let's move on to what the autopsy was and what really caused her death, although it couldn't be fully explained how it happened. The situation was determined by a process of elimination. The death wasn't. The main question was how. That was ruled out. It was also not caused by any sea animal that attacked her or anything like that. So her own vomit, what could it have been? Who's responsible and how did it occur? Because someone would have had to turn the knob on her oxygen tubes. So how was that possible? Besides, one has to think that what was thought was that her oxygen had been cut off from the tanks to the mask. So what had happened? The knob was properly placed, the diving equipment was perfect, it was in perfect condition, so that couldn't have been it. The big question really was that how had it happened? How had he drowned? What could have caused it if it wasn't his heart condition, nor choking on his own vomit? What could it have been? How did it happen, and who did it? Because someone would have had to turn the knob on his oxygen tubes, so how was that possible? Besides, one must consider that it takes time. It's not as easy as just pressing a button that takes time on one hand, and then it takes time for the person to suffocate when they stop getting oxygen. After the investigation began, and while still in Australia, Gabe asked the police to be interviewed again. He sought to clarify certain things. Firstly, he stated his wife hadn't been given the kind of orientation Wade had extensively discussed. Additionally, his rescue certification did not encompass everyone unconscious. We'll later delve into their requests, which he rejected. He even tried to run away from what they were doing to him. On the funeral side, when Alabama, Tommy was waiting there to ask him for explanations, to say hello, and Gabe, upon arriving at the Alabama airport, of absolutely everything, and they didn't want to give any responsibility to Tina's family. Honestly, I don't understand why that happened. I don't understand it to this day because it had no purpose. As the husband, Gabe had all the responsibility for the funeral, but he could have signed a power of attorney for Tina's family to take care of it, and in fact they asked him for it, but he denied them. She even tried to run away from Tommy as much as she could. Upon arriving at the Alabama airport, Tommy was there waiting to seek explanations. Say hello, and when Gabe arrived at the Alabama airport, she said her ear hurt and they had to take her to the hospital to make sure everything was okay. By the way, all was well. That is, she had done it in a message and contacted them to receive a... At the same time, the couple she had met on the ship had their suspicions about Gabe and wanted without further incidents. The only issue was what had happened. So, in order not to appear insensitive and not to disrespect the family, they decided to simply leave a message with the funeral director so that he could respond in due time. The message was as follows. If you want to talk to someone or some people who were on the boat, we would be more than happy to converse with you. Tommy finally replied to the message and contacted them to get a bit more information that later turned out to be very useful. The funeral went on with disagreements among the families, but without major incidents. The only problem in all of this was Gabe and his completely out of place, strange attitudes. He was a quite strange man. What can I say? First of all, to a friend of Tina who was there. Lamenting the loss, he showed her a picture of Tina in front of a sign saying dangerous tide, a small sign of someone who could drown, something completely out of place, something that is disrespectful at a funeral, and besides, he was also making somewhat disrespectful comments to Tina's friends. I'm not going to repeat them or anything like that, but they were disrespectful. Still, Gabe's family defended him regarding his attitude already. They always claimed he was like that. He had a somewhat strange humor, one could say somewhat particular. It is then after this funeral that Gabe begins to take actions regarding the life insurance and travel insurance he had requested. Unable to modify her life insurance, Tina was to receive an annual amount of $34,000 upon her death. And besides, the only beneficiary was Tommy, her father. So Gabe wanted the highest insurance. He wanted the insurance that was given to him, all the money, and $175,000 in total, which didn't work out well for him at all since Tommy had foreseen all of this. He hadn't foreseen his daughter's death, but he had foreseen that. Gabe had some crossed intentions. What he also did before was not change the life insurance and for the trip that supposedly covered deaths. The issue is that he didn't know this didn't cover deaths from diving. He found out about this once she wanted to claim the insurance. On top of all this, Tina had a mortgage debt of $12,000 and $5,000 for her funeral. Gabe's primary defense was that he wouldn't kill his wife, only for $34,000 when he owed so much money for her death and the mortgage. However, we have to remember that he didn't know about that. They hadn't changed the life insurance and therefore thought he would have $175,000 to spend. While he was trying to claim some kind of insurance, Tommy on his side was looking for help from people who were experienced in diving. He sought to comprehend more about the incident from an expert viewpoint, so he chose to contact the couple who communicated with him, the two couples who left him a message at the funeral. One of these people was Kenneth Snyder, a 60-year-old man who had spent many of these years diving, so he had the experience and he knew how a person should act in those circumstances in which Gabe was. He explained to Tommy that the story Gabe was telling didn't seem normal. He advised him that a person who is Drowning doesn't just extend their arms, but tries desperately to rise to the surface. So Tina would be trying to kick upwards and wouldn't just be falling downwards looking at Gabe. Besides, the dive computer she had on her wrist clearly showed how far Gabe had gone down, and it just didn't match the distance at which Tina would be descending. He didn't really go down to try to rescue her, as he said. He didn't try several times. He went to a certain point and then went back up, and on top of that, as I said before, he did it slowly. He had taken his time, and when Wade promptly went up, a case was opened for investigation. Tommy decided to travel to Australia to see directly the person who had saved his daughter, or who had tried to rescue her. He was Wade Singleton, the director of the trip. Could physically do in the water what Gabe had described if the story could turn out as he had, until the last moment, and that in fact he had not wanted to see her. He had been away. He had not said his name. He had not been witnessing how they rescued her. He lied to them in everything. Through forensic analysis, examination of Tina's diving gear, and testimonies from various divers, an investigation was initiated with experience. Criminal, 9 months later. Everything that could be done in terms of evidence of what had happened was done. 3D models were made. There were even people directly testing if what Gabe had described could physically be done in the water, if the tale could unfold as he claimed. 16 meters and falling to Wade's location suggested an inconsistency in his narrative. True is that the photo that was taken of the body, precisely because the trip's photographer was taking photos under the water, showed the exact location where Wade had been found, which means it was at 16 meters from the wreckage. Tina and Gabe were heading down directly towards the wreckage, and Tina supposedly hadn't strayed too far. That is, she was becoming a nun remembered having been stirred by Gabe, nor that it means that at no time could she have strayed from twice the weight she needed in her. Clearly she had lied in that part, but she had also lied about alerting 2 divers who were in the water. The police and investigators tried to get testimony from all the people who were in that place. At that moment, tons of people around the world, as this cruise is done by a lot of tourists, they asked them one by one, and none of these people remembered seeing a man alerting anyone. None of them remembered being agitated by Gabe, nor did they remember seeing him nearby. On the other hand, Tina had more than double the weight she needed in her vest. That is, they usually have a little weight to can sink. Over half the weight, really. Makes it hard to come back up. Therefore, even if she had inflated the vest, she alone could not have come up. The issue is the following. Who gave her that vest? Who gave her so much weight? Who let her go down like that? Hence, suspicions towards Gabe increase. And then an expert named Michael appears. McFadden, who was also coincidentally a very experienced diver, who didn't think it was possible that he was the culprit. Because according to this person, to turn off the oxygen, it would take a minute, then 30 seconds until the person began to panic and lack air, and only then would they fall unconscious. Then, when the person was already unconscious and falling, he would have to directly open the valve again to avoid raising suspicions. The oxygen valve, then there would be more inside the tank than he would have reached. Apart from this, it also indicated that Tina had very little air left in the tank, and that she could have fainted from having been breathing. Too much due to a panic attack underwater. We have when coming out of the water, as she said before, and the panic computer, supposedly, which seemed to her that she was in a state of panic above before getting into the water. This man then said that maybe in that attack she started to breathe very fast, she breathed a lot of air, she had none left, and she fainted. Let's say that if Gabe had closed her certificates, they were not for unconscious people, but when checking oxygen, not less. But the inconsistencies in Gabe's story were still there, and the lies had already been told. She had specifically studied for those certifications, and that water didn't cause any eardrum damage. Coming out of the water, as she said before, and the computer aside, showed that he had gone at a normal speed. Not the diving company that supposedly controlled them, left them alone, just the 2 of them, which is quite normal for experienced people, but it is not normal at all not to have gone back to give statements. In those statements, he said that his certificates were not for unconscious people, but when checking the certifications he had, they were for unconscious people. In fact, it was easy to prove. The certifications indicated that he had specifically studied for and passed the exam. So, Gabe was completely capable of rescuing unconscious people, but there is a big problem anyway, and it does not fall on Gabe. The travel company, the diving company that supposedly controlled them, left them to go alone, just the two of them together, which is quite normal for experienced people, but it's not at all normal for someone who knows almost nothing about diving. Tina had only made 5 trips, and some of them had been interrupted because she had panicked underwater. While there are areas that are more dangerous than others, Tina was definitely supposed to have a class where they explained everything she needed to know, and she also had to go out with a teacher, not with her partner, who had no certification to teach nor to supervise, which was mostly the important thing. She needed supervision wherever she went because she really didn't know, let alone what the interviews were for. That is, while Gabe had the certification to rescue unconscious people if it was in open ocean in a territory he was unfamiliar with or didn't know well enough, then maybe he wouldn't know how to act in that situation. In addition to all that, each diver keeps a diary recording all features of every trip made. What I wanted to say was that it stated she had halted trips due to panic. However, Wade let her go. It's okay that he, of all people, suggested she get counseling, but still the two of them went off alone, together, without a supervisor. The company also made several other mistakes regarding whether he was certified to rescue unconscious people if it was in the open ocean in a territory he was unfamiliar with or did not know well enough, then perhaps he would not know how to act in that situation. In addition to all that, each diver has a log where they record every trip they made with all the characteristics. What this meant was that Tina had written there that she had interrupted trips due to panic. However, Wade let her go. It's okay that he suggested she get guidance anyway, but he still let them go alone, the two of them together, without a supervisor. The company also made several other mistakes regarding safety issues. Each diver's tank should have had the specific color of their category. This way, it's simpler to distinguish between novices and experienced individuals. That is, death had not been an accident. They had several things against Gabe, mostly he had the certification to be her instructor. Still, they allowed them to leave alone. But the worst part was that Tina had to sign some papers indicating that she understood the risks of diving and that the company was not responsible for certain things. They were never given those papers. It could also be considered that Gabe knew about Tina's anxiety and decided to use this to his advantage to ensure death. A year post-events, Tina's family started testifying that her death had not been an accident. They had several things against Gabe, mostly because of his attitudes, but also someone was removing the flowers from Tina's grave. They believed it had been Gabe, mostly because they had recently requested to move Tina's grave to a plot that was his property. That is, Gabe's family, out of nowhere, asked to move Tina's grave to another place, which made no sense, but they could easily do it because Gabe was the husband and had everything necessary to do it. He didn't need to sign any paper, and it was his responsibility. He had full freedom, yet surprisingly, they amounted to nothing. According to Gabe's lawyer, Gabe's family, the flowers kept disappearing. Tommy would go with Tina's sister and mother to leave her flowers, and suddenly they would disappear. The police investigator who was in charge of the case decided to investigate a little more about this and went to the grave to wait for days with a camera to see who was responsible for this. It was none other than Gabe. He would show up at the grave, grab a wire, and remove the flowers that the family had left in the box where they were. He would then throw them onto the street as if they were nothing. According to Gabe's lawyer, he only did it because they were plastic and he knew that Tina didn't like them, so he simply decided to throw them away, despite the fact they were from his family. He later stated that he did it because he didn't like the family's attitude towards him, as they called him a murderer. So a judge told him to stop or he would look suspicious in the case of his wife's death. During that time, investigators were able to verify that this action of turning off and turning on the oxygen again was possible. That in that time in which he was in the water, it was completely possible to turn off Tina's oxygen and turn it back on and then ascend. On the other hand, he continued for years trying to obtain the life insurance and travel insurance compensations. Indeed, he went to trial for these compensations. He stopped at nothing until a judge told him to stop or he would look suspicious in the case of his wife's death. He sought reimbursement for everything: travel, medical, call and card costs, transportation, and emotional distress. All of that until a judge rejected it. Fortunately, the Australian police never stopped and even flew to Alabama to look for more clues close to the family and to close to Gabe. That's how they managed to obtain a few witnesses of somewhat uncomfortable situations in the couple, or Gabe's somewhat controlling behavior. The first scenario involved the engagement ring that Gabe had bought. It turns out that he showed it to Tina and told her she couldn't touch it or look at it, or he would return it. In fact, he would give it to her once he was ready. But there's another one that's somewhat worse, and it already crosses a limit. The event occurs in a pizzeria. Tina enters this place to order a pizza, and when she leaves, Gabe was not happy at all. It seems that he had not done things right, as he wanted. He had to do them exactly as he wanted. Then he enters the pizzeria, orders another pizza, and when he comes out, he throws it on Tina. Several witnesses saw the situation, and her friends were unsurprised. The father, of course, knew about all of this. Tina told him things, and evidently he did not like Gabe at all. In addition, there were two possible reasons why he would want to murder Tina. One of them was life insurance, and the other a possible infidelity. It turns out that before they got engaged, before Gabe asked her, they had broken up. Tina was unhappy with the relationship and didn't want to know more. So a friend suggested that she distract herself, that she go out with someone else to see if she really wanted to be in a relationship or not. Or maybe if she just wanted to separate from Gabe forever, so that at least she could decide. So this friend suggests to Tina to go on a trip where her cousin was so they could spend a weekend together. When Tina returns, she tells her friend that she really didn't want to be with Gabe anymore, that she had realized that the relationship wasn't working, but apparently Gabe also found out about this weekend with someone else. When he finds out about this, he proposes to Tina. They didn't reunite, he just gets upset and proposes to her. And I say he gets angry, which was recorded by friends. Then a whole fight started about the weekend he had spent with another person when they were no longer together. Really, none of Tina's friends could explain why she went back to him, but she did and accepted the marriage. The friend who introduced her to the cousin inquired if she was really sure after everything he had told her, and she answered yes, a bit doubtful, but she wanted to get married. After years of research and conflicts, he deeply loved her. Eventually, during that time, a year was conducted. It was the year 2007. Gabe was in a new relationship. He was with another girl, very similar to Tina, in fact, blonde, a very similar face that he had met during high school. It turns out that at that time they had seen each other again, and it seems that she didn't care about his past and also respected that he had a deceased wife. Gabe would precisely say, when asked, that his new girlfriend even allowed him to have Tina's photos around the house because she understood that it was part of his life and that he loved her very much. Eventually, during that time, a trial was conducted in Australia, which Gabe did not want to attend for a long time. He fought for months with his lawyer not to have to go until one day he simply said he was going to attend. During this trial, the testimonies were used that by the year 2010, he should have been released and had to return to the United States, but before he could start the defense, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter. He didn't mean to say that he had planned to kill his wife, but rather, he was guilty of not doing enough to save her. His original sentence from this would be 4 years, only to later be reduced to just 12 months. There was a lot of discussion about this. It was said that he had to do less. It was said that he had to do 1,010 to Gabe charges are imposed, that for the year 2010 he had to be released and had to return to the United States, but in the United States another trial awaited him. He had to attend another court for a new sentence. The issue was that Alabama had the death penalty while Australia did not. So, to return Gabe to the United States, they had to wait 3 weeks for them to sign that they were not going to prosecute him with the death penalty since it existed in Australia. Then, on November 25th, 2010, Gabe is charged with capital murder and kidnapping by deception. His lawyer manages to get him released from the charge of kidnapping by deception with a bail of $100,000, with an extra requirement of wearing a monitoring device and having a curfew. The murder trial was different. There was evidence that Gabe had taken the flowers from the grave. There were testimonies. This time the judge decided to dismiss the case. The trial officially commenced in Alabama in February 2012. In this trial, all the testimonies were used, even the testimony of a friend of Gabe who had done the certification with him to rescue unconscious people from the water was used. They had evidence of absolutely everything, and something completely unexpected happened. Gabe's defense asked, before presenting any evidence in his favor, that the case be dismissed. This is something that is done All the time in reality it's quite common and is asked for, let's say, just in case it's usually rejected, this time the judge decided to dismiss the case. Normally there is no hope that it will be like this, but this is the truth. But every time she told the story, something guilty of such a thing. She said that the evidence was not enough to declare that there had been an intention to kill Tina. Suppose she was released post-trial. She had to pay bail, she had to wear the monitoring device for a while, but she was not found guilty. Some people still think this is wrong, that the trial result was incorrect, she didn't know what to do. There really was no need to go to the police to clarify that she had not done it. She had no intention of killing her and that she had told the whole truth. But every time she recounted the story, something was wrong, something was out of place, she lied about everything she did. Why would she do that? There wasn't even any need to lie in any way. It made no difference whether he had gone quickly or had proceeded with caution. She could have directly said that she had taken classes to get certified in rescuing unconscious people, because she could have defended herself by saying that she was under a lot of pressure and didn't know what to do. There really was no need to go to the police to clarify that she hadn't done the certification with unconscious people, which was a lie on top of that. She made sure to get a travel insurance that he believed at that time would cover deaths, and also asked Tina to increase her life insurance and to make him the sole beneficiary. Maybe she was just a bad person in general, but perhaps she wasn't to blame for what happened to Tina, or maybe she planned it all. She got away with it. A year passed and half in jail and she left. I don't know, justice was left there. Tell me what you think about this case. It was tremendously long. I hope you saw it in full. If you made it this far, congratulations. Leave your opinions below. It's interesting to discuss what you think about what. If you have additional information, kindly comment. If you know more pieces of the, leave it below. And here the video finally ends. So well, I have nothing more to say. Here on the side are my Patreons. If you want to know more about it, there is a link in the description below. Sorry for the late video post. Due to moving and resolving various issues, everything got delayed. Absolutely everything. So well, from now on it's work, but well, I hope that you like the research here. You have a new video here, you have a recommended video, you can subscribe by clicking on my face, and I truly value your support in watching my recent videos. Have been getting a lot of views, besides they were very interesting, in my opinion, humble opinion. So I hope you guys liked it too. See you in another video. Goodbye.